Somewhere online right now, a 25-year-old with a spreadsheet is telling you that if you eat rice and beans for the next decade, you can retire by 35. It's technically true and almost completely useless to you because that math assumes you started at 25 with no mortgage, no kids, and no idea what a school tuition bill looks like. You're in your 40s. You've got real obligations, a career, maybe a minivan, and zero interest in a decade of rice and beans. Also, at this point, eating rice and beans for 10 straight years sounds less like a retirement plan and more like a punishment. So let's throw out the fantasy version and do the actual math for your actual situation, starting today with real numbers. Spoiler, 10 years is usually doable. It's just not the plan the 25-year-old is selling you, and it's going to require you to do something most people never do with money. Get specific. First, let's define what we're solving for, because retiring isn't really about age. It's about reaching a pile of money big enough to live off without a paycheck, what economists call financial independence. In 1994, a financial planner named William Bengen ran the numbers on every historical 30-year retirement he could find, and landed on a simple rule. Take your annual spending, multiply by 25, and you can withdraw 4% a year and probably never run out. It became personal finance's most famous piece of math. Quoted so often, it's basically the retirement world's national anthem. Here's the catch nobody mentions, though. That study assumed you'd retire around 65. If you retire at 50, your money might need to last 50 years, not 30, and later research from economists like Michael Kitches and Wade Pfau, who specifically stress-tested longer retirement horizons, suggests early retirees should plan closer to 3.5%, not 4. Translated, that's about 28 times your annual spending instead of 25. A bigger number, but not a crazy one. And then there's the other extreme. Financial personality Suze Orman has said more than once that $2 million is basically pennies, and that early retirees really need something closer to $10 million just to feel safe. Here's the honest take. She's not wrong that bad things happen. She's also a woman worth hundreds of millions telling regular people to aim for a number reserved for lottery winners. The real target sits between her number and the internet's fantasy number, and for most people spending $60,000 to $80,000 a year, that lands somewhere around $1.7 to $2.3 million. Comfortably rich, not private jet rich. Now, here's the part that actually decides whether 10 years is realistic, and it has almost nothing to do with picking the right stocks. Over 10 years, compounding barely gets a turn. It needs decades to work its magic, and you only have one, which means the entire plan rests on a single number: your savings rate, the percentage of your income you don't spend. Save 15% starting from zero, and you're looking at roughly 40 years to financial independence, essentially never. Save 25%, about 32 years. Save 35%, 25 years. Save 50%, 18 years. Save 70%, right around 10. That's the whole secret, and it isn't really a secret. It's arithmetic anyone can check on a napkin. The average American household saves under 10% of its income. To retire in a decade, you don't need a better stock pick. You need to roughly multiply your savings rate by 6. Let's make this concrete. Say you're 42, earning $150,000 after tax, and you've already got $350,000 saved. Your target is $60,000 a year in retirement, which at that 3.5% rate puts your number around $1.7 million. Left alone, your existing savings grow to roughly $627,000 over the decade. That leaves a gap of about $1.1 million you have to build from new contributions, which works out to around $6,800 a month, just over $82,000 a year. On $150,000 of after-tax income, that's a savings rate above 50%. Tight? Extremely. Impossible? No. That's the real math, not the vibe. And full retirement in exactly 10 years isn't the only version of this math either. There's a middle path called Coast FI, where you front-load your savings hard enough that compounding alone, without another dollar contributed, will grow into your number by a normal retirement age. Hit that point, and you can drop to a lower-paying, lower-stress job, or go part-time purely for current expenses, while the account coasts to the finish line on its own. There's also Barista Fire, working just enough for health insurance and spending money while a smaller nest egg covers the rest. Neither requires the brutal 50+% rate for a full decade. If the math above feels impossible on your income, this is usually the honest middle ground, not failure, just a different finish line. So how do actual people hit 50 or 70% without eating rice and beans for a decade? A few real levers beyond the obvious cut spending. 1. Income growth. A raise, a certification, a job switch, even 2 brutal but high-paying years all shorten the timeline because a bigger income at the same expenses is a bigger savings rate for free. 2. Geographic arbitrage. Keep a remote salary and move somewhere your dollar buys twice the house and half the property tax, and you've engineered a raise without asking anyone. 3. House hacking. Buying a duplex or a home with a rentable unit and letting a tenant cover most of your mortgage, quietly turning your biggest expense into a savings vehicle. None of these are secrets. Fire bloggers have written about them for 15 years. What's different starting in your 40s is you don't have 15 years to experiment. You pick 2 or 3 levers, pull them hard, and track the number monthly. Because a decade disappears fast when you're not watching it. And a quick warning, because a few mistakes sink these plans more than bad luck ever does. Lifestyle creep is the biggest one. Every raise quietly turning into a nicer car instead of a bigger contribution, resetting your savings rate right back to where you started. Underestimating actual retirement spending is another. People plan around today's frugal, still working budget, and forget that retirement adds free time. And free time tends to add spending, more travel, more hobbies, more everything. And forgetting taxes trips people up too. Even the penalty-free withdrawal strategies we're about to cover still owe ordinary income tax in most cases. The penalty disappears. The tax bill usually doesn't. None of these mistakes are exotic. They're just the boring stuff that never makes it into the viral spreadsheet. And here's the part that should genuinely excite you. Cutting spending is a 2-for-1 deal in this math. Every dollar you stop spending shrinks your finish line, because your target is based on your expenses, and it grows your savings rate because that same dollar now gets invested instead of spent. Cut $1,000 a month, and you move toward the goal from both directions at once. That's why serious early retirement math obsesses over spending far more than income. A raise helps. A canceled subscription helps twice. Now, the parts nobody puts in the spreadsheet. First, healthcare. Fidelity has published an annual retiree healthcare cost estimate every year since 2002, when the number started at around $80,000 for a typical 65-year-old. Today, that same estimate sits well north of $180,000, and it's climbed a little more almost every single year for over 2 decades straight. That figure also assumes you already qualify for Medicare, which doesn't kick in until 65. Retire at 48, and you're looking at a 17-year gap to cover on your own. And that gap is more fragile than people assume, because it often depends on government subsidies that are anything but permanent. Enhanced subsidies introduced in 2021 made marketplace health insurance dramatically cheaper for years, right up until they were allowed to expire at the end of 2025, at which point premiums for many early retirees more than doubled almost overnight. The lesson isn't about that one policy change specifically, it's the pattern underneath it. Subsidy rules move with whatever Congress feels like doing in a given year, and betting your healthcare budget on today's rules staying put for the next 2 decades is not a plan. It's a hope. Budget the full, unsubsidized cost as your baseline, and treat any subsidy you actually receive as a bonus on top of a number that already worked without it. Second, access. Most of your money is probably locked in a 401k or IRA, with penalties for touching it before 59.5. The good news, there are legal, well-worn workarounds. Leave your job the year you turn 55 or later, and you can tap that employer's 401k penalty-free, known as the Rule of 55. There's also a setup called substantially equal periodic payments, fixed distributions taken early without penalty as long as you commit to the schedule. And there's the Roth conversion ladder, moving money from a traditional account into a Roth a few years ahead of when you'll need it, so it's ready and penalty-free by retirement. None of these are loopholes. They're built into the tax code on purpose. You just have to know they exist. One more wrinkle, and it's the one that quietly wrecks the most plans. Sequence of returns risk. Imagine 2 people who each average 7% a year over 30 years of retirement, identical average return. One retires into a crash, losing 30% in year 1 while still withdrawing money to live on. The other retires the same year, but the crash happens to arrive in year 28 instead. The first retiree can run out of money entirely. The second barely notices. Same average return on paper, One retiree is fine, and one is back on LinkedIn updating their resume. Wildly different outcome based entirely on timing nobody controls. It's why serious early retirees keep a cash cushion and stay flexible on spending in bad years instead of blindly withdrawing the same amount no matter what the market just did. None of this is theoretical, by the way. A blogger who goes by Joe, who runs a site literally called Retire by 40, spent 16 years building toward this and hit financial independence at 38. High savings rate, index funds, some rental income, and patience. No meme stocks, no secret formula, nothing you'd need a course to learn. Starting in your 40s just compresses his timeline and raises the required savings rate because you're starting the clock later with, hopefully, a head start already sitting in your accounts. The math doesn't care what decade you start in. It only cares what percentage of each paycheck you actually keep. So, is 10 years realistic in your 40s? Genuinely yes for a lot of people, but only under the real math, not the fantasy version. It takes a savings rate most Americans have never attempted, an honest healthcare budget, and a plan for reaching your own money before the government officially says you're allowed to. Suze Orman is right that bad things happen. She's just wrong that the answer is giving up or waiting for $10 million. The answer is margin, plan for a bit worse than average, stay flexible, and let 1 decade of aggressive saving do what decades of casual saving never could. 10 years won't feel short while you're living it, especially somewhere around year 4 when the spreadsheet feels like it's mocking you. But looking back at it from the other side, it'll feel like the fastest decade of your life.